What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3, coming to you on Tuesday, January 28th, 2025, coming to you from Long Beach, California. Have a jam-packed episode for you guys in store today as I dive into all the latest from Oregon and Dan Lanning's massive, and I do mean massive, Junior Day recruiting event over in Eugene. Before I get into it, make sure you guys are locked in with me on all social media platforms at mtorresports, and make sure you're locked in to ScoopDuck.com, where you can get all the latest and greatest in Oregon football recruiting. You can even try us out for just $1. So make sure you guys do that for me. Come join our community. We got super active message boards, and some of the best Duck fans in the country are all over there talking Ducks every single day. So it's the place to be, and I hope you can join us. So, big weekend for Dan Lanning and the Ducks, as I said. Really, this was something that kind of started off as the Elite Day, and then it kind of got tabbed Junior Day. But make no mistake, there were more than just 2026 prospects on campus out in Eugene this weekend. You had the 2026 prospects. Not sure why I have this headphone in. It's just me. You have the 2026 prospects on campus. A lot of those rising seniors, I guess you could say. They're juniors currently, but they are on the clock. The 2026 class, I wrote about it last week, is taking center stage, not only for Oregon, but for programs across the country. And not only did you have a bunch of the best in the country on campus in Eugene over the weekend, you also had Dan Lanning, Chris Hampton, Will Stein, Tosh Lapoy, Tony Tuioti, a bunch of Oregon's coaching staff spread throughout the country last week and already now again this week on the road during the January contact period. So these coaches were able to get quality one-on-one FaceTime with recruits in their home cities, at their schools, sometimes in home visits, right? To kind of parlay that momentum into the recruiting weekend. Not every guy that was there was visited by the coaches before the weekend, but in a lot of instances, you had guys that were visited by the coaches at their school or in their hometowns during the week, and then they made the trip out to Eugene. So that's not an uncommon approach, as I've seen in my years covering recruiting, but I think it's a smart one, and one that I'm not surprised to see Dan Lanning take on the recruiting trail. So I'm going to get into some of the updates that I was able to get and have been able to get since the weekend concluded. If you guys have been reading and tuned in with us over at ScoopDuck.com, I have been churning out a ton of updates on priority targets in the 2026 and 2027 classes. Like I just said in the open there, 2026 was the main focus for Lanning and the Ducks this past weekend, but we also saw a bevy of top 2027 targets, specifically from the state of California, right in my backyard, that chose to make their trip out to Eugene and spend their weekend with the Ducks. So let's get into our first recruit of the day, and it is a name Oregon fans know very well at this point. 2026 four-star Orange Lutheran linebacker Talanoa Ili. This is one of the truly elite prospects on Oregon's board in the 2026 class, and he was back in town for his third trip with the Ducks. And Oregon did make a pretty significant move in this recruitment, but this trip also had a pretty specific purpose for Talanoa and his camp. He was joined on the trip by both of his parents and his sister. So always, I think, kind of brownie points, bonus points for Oregon to be able to get as many family members on campus as possible. But I spoke with Eli before and after this trip, and he told me that it was really important for his mom to accompany him on this trip to kind of get a feel for Oregon outside of that game day atmosphere, right? It's pretty easy, I think, for everything to be kind of all sunshine and rainbows, excitement, flash, Nike, all those great things that people talk about with Oregon on a game day. But what's it like in the off season? And I say off season because if you've been rocking with me for a while, you know that there's not really too much of an off season with this recruiting thing. So Oregon has been all out on the recruiting trail, and they hosted Eli as one of their premier targets for Junior Day. And the trip went really well. The big update that I got from Eli after speaking with him coming out of the trip is that Oregon is at the top of his list. he didn't really say leader, but that's pretty much what we can draw from it, right? I think that those are pretty similar conversations there. So Eli is one of the very best defenders in the Trinity League. I have the highlights here, some of his tape from his junior year. If you're watching us on the ScoopDuck On 3 YouTube channel, if you are watching us on YouTube, thank you so much. And if you're not, come check us out on the YouTube channel and make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. It greatly helps us, and we appreciate all that support. I think I was actually at this Sarah game last year, and that was a fun one to cover. Eli is just flying all over the field there. He plays mostly as a traditional inside linebacker, middle linebacker, but talking to him and some sources, it looks like he is probably going to fit into that Oregon system as an edge kind of a guy, maybe in that Tatum Tuioti role, I believe, is what he had spoken with me about in some of our previous interviews. And I think you have to be excited about that. 6'3", 220 pounds. I think that is around what Tatum is actually at. So not too hard to see the comparison there, or at least the similarity, I should say, in a role. So Oregon's done a really good job in the Trinity League, right? Modern day St. John Bosco, but we haven't heard a whole lot about Orange Lutheran, at least in recent years. They had their quarterback, TJ Lateef, commit and sign to Nebraska last cycle in the 2025 class. So this is a school that has certainly been known to produce some pretty talented players. So you like to see Oregon kind of diversifying some of these top targets in these schools that they're going after in Southern California. So Talanoa Ili has been a priority target for the Ducks and will continue to be throughout the remainder of his recruitment. Believe he's heading to UCLA and USC this weekend. Of course, just a reminder, if you guys aren't in tune with the recruiting calendar, things are going to go dead. The dead period starts for recruiting on Sunday, February 1st, and pretty much the entire month of February will be dead. So really, really extra important for Oregon and any school to get recruits on campus this past weekend and then this upcoming weekend. It doesn't seem like this upcoming weekend is going to be too crazy busy for Oregon. Certainly not in comparison to this past weekend, but I'll make sure to do some digging and keep you guys updated to the best of my ability. So that's all I really have to say about Talanoa Ili right now. He is one of Oregon's tip top linebacker targets in the 2026 class. I think another one that is worth a mention if we're talking about linebackers is 2026 linebacker Tyler Atkinson out of the state of Georgia. He was actually scheduled to be on campus for his first visit to Oregon this past weekend, but sounds like he came down with a flu or some sort of sickness, so he wasn't able to make the trip. I saw him out in San Antonio for the Navy All-American Bowl and was able to talk to him. And even though he's never visited Oregon before, he's definitely had some really good things to say about the Ducks and a long-standing relationship with Dan Lanning. So maybe bookmark Tyler Atkinson. That's a guy that you have to keep tabs on. I think that you probably look at Georgia as the front runner there, and it's not hard to see why. But Oregon's going to chip away. They're going to do what they can every single cycle to try to make a little bit more of an impact and make their presence felt in the Southeast. Next guy I'm going to talk about here is one I am pretty excited about because he's a little bit of a more unknown name in the Oregon recruiting circles, but I'm telling you that you need to know who he is, and that is 2026 Meridian, Idaho Rocky Mountain interior offensive lineman Jax Tanner, the reigning Idaho Gatorade Player of the Year. He is one of Oregon's growing priority targets, one of Malik Terry's big targets here in the 2026 recruiting class. You see some of this tape here at the start, playing on the right side of the line, some right tackle for Tanner. But he told me in an interview, also posted on ScoopDuck, that he is primarily being looked at as a center at Oregon and that he would kind of play that poncho role to just, he said in his words, I think it was, to just come in and run everybody over. So this is a guy, you kind of have one every class, every cycle that just keeps coming back to Oregon. Like, it feels like every time I'm talking about visitors that come to check out the Ducks, Jax Tanner is there. Like, I think he is that guy. Last cycle, I think you could say it was Fox Crater from Vancouver, Washington, Evergreen High School. And that's not too far away, but he was at almost every Oregon home game. And Tanner isn't in, I guess he is kind of in the Northwest, right? The inland Northwest, if you will, in the state of Idaho. He's not as close as Fox Crater was, but he was at the spring game last year. He came back to Oregon for the Saturday Night Live camp where he was offered by the Ducks. Joe Lorig actually playing a big role in this recruitment. We'll get into a bit more on him later. But then he also came to 2 games last season, and he was back in Eugene for Junior Day. And we know that Coach Dan Lanning's going to visit him this week out on the road. At least that's what he told me in the interview was the plan for him. So again, like I was talking about earlier on in the podcast, I think it was Lorig and Alik Terry that went out to Idaho to go see Jax Tanner last week before the visit. He visits, things go great, and then now Lanning is going to go out to see him again this week. So the Ducks are doing everything they can to just capitalize on momentum here. And Jax Tanner couldn't find enough good things to say about Oregon. Incredibly complimentary of Joe Lorig. One of the highlights I remember from the story was that his brother kind of wanted to check out the facility, and Tanner told me he texted Lorig and said, hey, can we kind of make this happen? And he said he was on it faster than lightning or something like that along those lines was the quote. So the interesting part with Tanner is that he's not the highest rated guy. I think for On3, we actually don't even have him ranked right now. But his offer sheet is really impressive. I know that USC was a recent offer for him, and you're looking at BYU and Boise State as a couple of other top competitors in Jax Tanner's recruitment. But Oregon's done a great job here, and I think I would be pretty confident saying that they are his leader right now. But BYU is definitely going to be a competitor. Words are hard. Slow it down, Max. BYU is going to be a competitor in this recruitment. If memory serves, Tanner told me that he has a couple of brothers that also played football, and at least one of them played at BYU. And they took mission trips. So we know that is also a little bit of a factor here. We saw it earlier this month, McKay Matson, a 2025 linebacker that is also going to be taking a mission trip with the LDS Church. He committed to BYU over Oregon and UCLA. So I think that's always a factor that you kind of have to look at in this recruitment. And BYU obviously has that unique edge over the Ducks, but I don't think that's going to be the end all be all here. This is a guy that really, really likes Oregon. And I think if we're talking about the top center prospects for the Ducks here in the 2026 cycle, I would put Jax Tanner up there. And I would also put Grant Wise up there. If you'll remember Grant Wise, he's a really, really coveted lineman out of the state of Florida. Took his first trip out to Oregon. I want to say it was for that Washington game or one of those later games last season. And Alik Terry made sure to go out and see him in Florida, his home state, mind you, during the January contact period. So I'm feeling pretty confident about where the Ducks stand right now with Tanner, but no concrete finish line in sight. I think he's going to get back out to Oregon for spring ball, see some spring practice. And he also mentioned he wants to take an official visit to Oregon. So for sure, without a doubt, definitely one to watch here coming out of another strong visit to Oregon for Junior Day. Jax Tanner, 2026 lineman out of the state of Idaho. Okay, let's sprinkle in a little bit of 2027 now. Shall we, folks? Glad to have you guys here rocking with me on another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast here on a Tuesday. Max Torres with ScoopDuck. It's a fun time. It is a fun time in recruiting right now. I know I'm going to be missing how busy things are once we get to February because there's not going to be quite as much to talk about with the dead period, but we're not in February yet. We're at the tail end of January, so there is plenty to talk about, and I am stoked to just cover all of it. Oregon has the number 1 class in 2026 with 10 verbal commitments, and they're making really good headway with some of these 2027. So let's talk about one of the very best on the West Coast, and that is 2027 San Diego, California Cathedral Catholic athlete Honor Fa'a'lave-Johnson. And he is someone that keeps visiting Oregon. He keeps visiting Oregon, and he starts off his 2024 highlights here with just an absolute wallop of a hit there from the defensive back position. I think the main thing that I want to get into, or at least lead off here with Honor Fa'a'lave-Johnson, is that he's listed on, I think, most major recruiting services. He is on On3 as an athlete. And most of the time that I have covered Honor Fa'a'lave-Johnson to this point, it's been focusing on, okay, You're one of the top running backs out west, one of the top running backs in the 2027 cycle, and that appeal to Oregon, right? And where things are at there. But he's getting some play here as a DB, and it sounds like Oregon is recruiting him to play both sides of the ball. And this could be a situation rather, where he maybe ends up being a better fit on defense. I think he's around 6 foot, 180 pounds. So he is someone that I think they view as having the frame to play either side of the ball. But he told me in the interview that he's probably going to have to choose one side of the ball coming to the college level. So just something to watch for there. But this guy is incredibly gifted. He's one of the very best players in San Diego. And we've known that Oregon has strong San Diego ties, and they're building a really good pipeline to Lincoln. They already kind of have one, right? The defending California 1AA state champions, led by current Oregon early enrollee true freshman Achilles Smith Jr., one of the best quarterbacks out west in the 25 cycle and an Oregon legacy. Then you also have Jalil Florence, who's a cornerback at Oregon. He went to Lincoln. And we have a new Duck in Isaiah World, who transferred from Nevada to Oregon this offseason, that also played at Lincoln before he got to college. So maybe Oregon's looking to build a new pipeline here to Cathedral Catholic. And if not a new pipeline to a school, just continue that San Diego pipeline. And the big update with Honor Fa'a'lave-Johnson, at least on my end, coming out of the weekend, is I went ahead and put in an on 3 RPM prediction for Oregon to land Fa'a'lave-Johnson. I will say that kind of comes with the caveat, with the stipulation that this is still a recruitment that has quite a long way to go, right? This is a guy who hasn't even played it down in his junior season yet. But I think that I've covered this one enough, and I have a good enough pulse on this one to know that Oregon is the pretty clear leader right now. But there are a host of other really impressive schools on his offer sheet. You look at Penn State, Miami as a couple that are standing out as well. I know he's been to USC a couple times, and USC looks like they're putting a new emphasis on Southern California recruiting, which they haven't necessarily done, or at least not to the level that you'd expect in recent years. But when Fa'a'lave-Johnson was on campus this past weekend, he got to spend time with just about every member of the Oregon coaching staff. Rashad Samples, of course, the running backs coach, Chris Hampton, and other members of the staff. But he knows he's a priority at Oregon, and I think that the Ducks have done a really good job here setting the standard, or setting the pace, I should say, in his recruitment. So admittedly, this is one that has a long ways to go, but Honor Fa'a'lave-Johnson is one of the very best in the country, and one of the very best in a loaded, and I mean loaded, 2027 California recruiting class. Really, really good state in 2027, and I'm excited to hopefully get to cover Fa'a'lave-Johnson in person sometime soon. My sister's out in San Diego, so maybe I'll take a trip down to see her and go check out Cathedral Catholic and Honor Fa'a'lave-Johnson, see what he's got in store. So a lot of the discussion, at least coming from my end, has been about him at running back, but now you got to look at him as a safety, as a DB, and how he could potentially translate to the next level there. So just an interesting wrinkle in this recruitment as it continues to evolve. But I think Oregon is the early favorite now for Honor Fa'a'lave-Johnson, who is ranked inside the top 50 prospects nationally for us over at On 3. We got at least one more guy that we want to get into today. Maybe it won't be as long of an episode. Just got a lot of stuff going on right now. But let's talk about another one in Southern California, and that is 2026 Westlake Village, California, Oaks Christian 4-star running back Deshonne Redeaux. You see him there running up the sideline, that number 4. He took his third trip out to Oregon this past weekend, and the Ducks made him feel like a priority. The most interesting thing to me with Deshonne Redeaux and his recruitment, I had never gotten a resounding feeling that he was a main guy that Oregon was going after in Southern California and the 2026 class. But clearly the visit went well enough that and he told me what he did. You can read the full interview again on ScoopDuck.com if you're a member, a subscriber. But he said enough to really show that he's feeling and getting that attention from Oregon like he is a priority. He talked about Rashad Samples' pedigree. We know that, of course, he was coaching on the Los Angeles Rams coaching staff before He got to Oregon, also spent some time at Arizona State as well. So his pedigree, as young as he is already kind of a hit on the recruiting trail. And we know that Carlos Loughlin recruited Jordan James, but Samples is going to be the last coach that worked with him before he got to the NFL. So it's only natural that he'll get some level of credit with that development of Jordan James. And this was a recruitment that took a little bit of a reset when Carlos Loughlin was hired away from Oregon to go to Ohio State, like we just talked about. But Redeaux told me that Samples kind of got right in there and they connected really quickly. So for him to get on campus, I think was really big because there's a lot of big schools that are going after him in his recruitment. And he's a top guy from Southern California. Oaks Christian is definitely one, again, not in the Trinity League. I think it's the Marmont League that Oregon has really kind of continued to try to push for. You'll think about Hayden Lowe, the 2025 edge rusher that the Ducks went after. He flipped from USC to Miami in a bit of a shocker last cycle, and we know that Oregon did everything they could to kind of stay involved there. Devon Benjamin is also at Oaks Christian, another one of the very best in 2026. So this is a school you definitely have to watch out for. Oaks Christian is one of the best in their league, along with St. Bonaventure out there in Ventura. So this is one that I think will be fun to follow. We know the Ducks already have one commitment at running back in the 2026 class in Tredarian Ball out of Texarkana in the beautiful state of Texas in the Lone Star State. And that's one of the reasons I'm going to be fascinated to follow this recruitment and just see how big of a priority Redeaux is, because we know that Samples is a Texas guy and that he's put so much of his recruiting attention on his home state, as you would expect. So maybe if Redeaux is a big priority, I think that speaks to his ability and how the Ducks view him moving forward as a recruit. So Redeaux is going to be one of those big recruitments that I have a close eye on moving forward. We're still kind of trying to see some clarity about what other big-time running backs the Ducks are going after. There are a host of offers that Samples already sent out to running backs in his home state of Texas, but I think Redeaux is one of the very best out west, and as such is going to be one to follow closely here. Let's talk about one more, and I'm not going to put the highlights up. I'm kind of just going to freeball this one. One of the other big developments from the weekend, the Ducks were able to get five-star tight end commit Kendra Harrison all the way from North Carolina on campus for a visit. I believe that was his first trip since he committed the Ducks back in November. And you can read the full story over on ScoopDuck, but that was one of the absolute, how do I say it? One of the most pro-Oregon interviews I think I've ever gotten. And I've been covering the Ducks since 2018. So he was just gushing about the Ducks and how comfortable he feels out there. And he told me that he didn't really want to go home after his visit. So I think that speaks a lot to his comfortability out in Oregon and just how much he loves it. And he's also slated to play basketball for Oregon. So that's obviously big. He got to spend a lot of time with Drew Maringer over the weekend. And I think that was great as they kind of continue to develop their long-standing relationship, one that's gone for a long time. So he's the headliner, and to have Harrison on campus, your class headliner, when there were so many other good guys on campus, I think that that's going to continue to be really favorable for Oregon's 2026 class. If you have the number one guy at his position all the way from the state of North Carolina, but he wants to come play for Dan Lanning, come out to Eugene for his college ball, I think that that's really indicative of just how special things are looking in Eugene. The other thing that I'll add with Kendra Harrison, he said he's going to take 3 or maybe as many as 4 unofficial visits back to Oregon before he takes his official visit, probably in June. And he's going to be enrolling early at Oregon, which means he will kind of forego, if you will, his senior season of basketball. But he said that if he wants to be a day one starter at Oregon, so it's important for him to get up to Eugene and hit the ground running, start competing right away. We know the Ducks have a need at tight end after losing Terrence Ferguson and Patrick Herbert, who exhausted their college eligibility. And then they, of course, brought in Jamari Johnson from Louisville and signed Vander Plug in the 2025 recruiting class. But I think you still have a need. You'd like to have a little bit more talent in that room, and you can't set the bar any higher than Kendra Harrison. So that is going to be a fun one to watch as the Ducks continue to push for some of the very best talent in the 2026 recruiting class. And the coaches are out on the road, right? I have an interview that maybe it won't be coming out today, maybe tomorrow, we'll have to see, but it's a top DB in the 2026 class all the way on the East Coast that Oregon looks like they're kind of crawling their way back into his recruitment. So keep an eye out for that one, and make sure to give it a read, because that is an interesting recruitment for sure. But that will do it for us here on today's episode of the pod. Before I get out of here, make sure you're following me everywhere at Torres Sports. Subscribe to the ScoopDuck On 3 YouTube channel. We are on the road to 3K, and make sure to subscribe and come check us out at ScoopDuck.com. There's no better place to be if you're looking for Oregon recruiting. So that'll do it for us. Make sure you share the show, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast.